Should do the red dot. Good. All right, so to start out with throwing, you need to get your tools and your clay. Your clay should be wedged. I chose to wedge mine in a spiral pattern, and I'm also going to slap it around into a more rounded sort of shape so that it's more even. And I'll do this more once it's on the wheel as well, because the most important part of throwing is centering. So as well as your clay, you'll need a bat. That is what attaches to the wheel head for you to throw on. You can just throw on the wheel head, but it's not as easy. It's better to do it with a bat. You will need a sponge and a bucket of water. A rib will help. A wooden tool that's cleaned off, since this one's on, I'll clean it later. And a needle tool, which is one of the tools like this. So I have all my tools here within reach. I also have a mirror up so that I can see the shape that I'm making a lot easier than just being above it right here. So once I get my clay kind of more rounded, I want to make sure, and I did this, you see this drawing here is going to be, that's center, that's my target. So I want to hit that as close as possible on the wheel, because if I don't do that, it's going to make centering almost impossible, or really, really much more difficult than it needs to be. Stick. I'm going to put a little water on the wheel, not much, I'm just putting a very small amount to help it stick down. It's a little too dry. Try again. Alright. It's a little bigger than my target, but I can still kind of see. Can visually look over the top of it to see, make sure. And then with the wheel off, I'm not going to turn the wheel on yet. I want to try to force it into center visually, like just from here, just kind of give it a little head start. And to do that, I'm going to tap my hands down and rotate. Just keep tapping them and rotating it. And that helps get the clay a little bit more visually center before you start. Might need to, or this is an important step. Makes it difficult if you don't get this step going first. So once I have it on there, and I'm pretty sure I can make sure it's going to stay, it's not going to fly off, and to second make sure it's not going to fly off, I'm going to take my finger in a little water, and I'm just going to push down on the edge. And that's kind of suctioning it down as well, creating what's called a skirt. Now I'm using porcelain clay, so it's going to look a little different than what you guys will be using. So this whole wheel situation works with centripetal acceleration, which is the clay is it's spinning. It's spinning, and as it's spinning, you have centrifugal force working, which is the wheel is got the tendency for the object to kind of fly off. It's going to spin, 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 and it wants to fly off. Your job as the potter is to keep it from flying off and to keep it, forcing it in on itself to make sure it goes into center so that you can pull it up and can do all this stuff. Not being able to get it into center means you won't be successful at throwing. You can still make things without being completely center, but they won't look as good. So center is the #1 way to make sure you can pull successfully and create things. So you want to manipulate the clay upward instead of outward, because the clay naturally wants to spin outward as it goes. Outside here is spinning, the wheel out here is the outside area is spinning faster than the inside area. So we want to remember that one if we're ever pulling out, when you're pulling out with bowls, but we're not going to do that. We're going to make a cylinder. So another part of this is friction. As you see, my hands will stick to it. And to keep it from doing that, we need water. Not a whole lot of water, but a little bit. And that keeps the friction from happening, and it can move through your hands. You need to keep the balance of force and lubrication going so that it stays kind of consistent and steady when you're centering. So one of the ways to do that is to have a boss hand and an assistant hand. And I'm going to make my boss hand, your boss hand needs to be your left hand, and my assistant hand is going to hold the sponge, and it's going to be my right hand. Now I'm going to tuck my elbow And you see how my body is very close to the wheel. I'm tucking my elbow into my thigh and hip area, to use my body to do this, not my arm, to use my whole body to push this in, because you're getting more strength from your body, and it makes it easier to center. So while my boss hand is going to be pushing forward this way, because the clay will spinning this way, so I want to force it back in this way. So I'm going to be pushing forward this way, and the best way to learn to center is coning up and down. So while I'm pushing it, forcing it this way, I'm also going to be pulling it up as well, as a way to keep it from going outward. Increasing the speed of the wheel requires you to apply more force. So going slower, you can do less force. Going faster, you're going to have to apply more force. So we kind of want to make sure we're going at a nice even speed. Not too fast, not too slow. But also remembering that it's kind of easy, it's better to go slower, because when you're going fast, it's easier to make mistakes, and those mistakes can be a lot harder to fix later down the road. Much like if you're driving, you have a wreck, going too fast, it's going to be a lot worse than if you were going slow. So this is pulling, coning up and coning down. You see my boss hand is doing most of the action here. My assistant hand is just kind of pulling up, and my assistant hand has got it, my thumb is pressed behind the boss hand to keep it in place. I'm trying to go pull up slowly, but it's not, I'm doing a little faster than I should be, and you can see that in the way that there's a slight wiggle going up. At the top, I'm not going to just pull my hands off, just jerk them off, because that'll pull it off center. I'm going to just kind of easily take them off. So now it's time to go down. This is where centering happens, is pushing up and pushing down. And you might see some clay come off on the side, or a little uneven on the side. And that is from where I didn't get it completely center on the wheel, and that's the clay working its excess clay out. That's the off-center clay out. So here I would take my assistant hand is going to be doing a lot more of the work, because it's going to be karate chopping down. I'm going to hold my boss hand's thumb. It's going to karate chop down, but while it's karate chopping down, my boss hand is going to use the fat of its thumb to kind of push down and forward. It's helping it push down and pushing forward. And when you get down, you want to tilt your hand back, because it's called coning up and coning down, and we want to try to keep it into that cone shape. You see I have more of that excess coming off that I'll have to get rid of. Just a second. So you're just going to keep doing that. One of the ways I've learned is I don't want to rush it, so I'm going to just kind of use my body to push forward here at the bottom. And I'm just letting it rotate through my hands, but keeping my force steady. All right, so remembering doing that up and down several times is, sometimes it can take a lot more, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the clay, it depends on your day sometimes it's easier. Centering is difficult for almost everyone. That's why there's so many different ways to do it, so many different tools to help you do it, and if you find a way that works better for you, it's totally fine. But you just need to make sure that one of the ways to tell something is center is if you look at it on the wheel and it doesn't look like it's moving. Now you can see my bottom is slightly more wiggly, and that's because it's not as center as my top. I usually do struggle with centering my bottoms. You can also press your nail against it to see if it's center. Line depths are the same, but those kind of things can lie to you. The easiest ways to do it is to put your hands on both sides of it and close your eyes and let it just kind of roll through your hands for a second. If you feel the clay, first of all, your arms should not be moving at all. Second of all, if you feel the clay wiggling a little, that means it's not finished yet. So this is still not finished. I'm going to do it a couple more times to get it there. And if I start to feel a little wiggle, what I'm doing is I'm stopping and I'm just letting it rotate, 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 and then I keep moving up again. Rotate, rotate, rotate. Just making sure it has this even kind of consistency happening. So that we're working on keeping it as center. Not as much disturbances, because if I jerk my hand, or I accidentally knock it, or I go too fast, or anything, any change is going to cause it to knock off center. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. When accidents do happen, you just have to find your way back if it does. So that includes when I get to the top, I'm not going to jerk my hands off. I'm going to let it rotate, rotate, rotate. I'm going to easily let off. So then it's time to push it back down again. Again, I'm going to do the rotate thing again. If I start to feel it wiggle, should be feeling like it's going down fairly smooth. Start to have a wiggle there, so I'm going to let it stop for a second. When you see my hand stop, that's me letting it just kind of rotate through my hand a couple times to help keep pressure even. Especially if I'm starting to feel any inconsistency. And then tilting back. Again, it should look like, you know, you're getting the center. You can tell it's not moving. Also, you don't want to touch it ever if it's not moving, because you can knock it off center if you touch it when the wheel's not moving. So this is fairly center at this point. Maybe going up on it would do one more, but I think I'm good. So now what I need to do is I kind of need to get it into a flattened top with that hockey puck shape. Let it rotate through as well. I'm going to keep things even and consistent. Still don't want to knock it off center. And then once we have our hockey puck, you want to put your thumbs on the very center of the clay. Remember, everything has to be center or it knocks everything off. So once I can put my thumbs in the center and I don't feel them moving around, I'm going to press down. And once my thumbs, I kind of get them at an angle, and I'm pressing down on them. Once they are down, up and down, straight up and down, I'm going to pull my thumbs out. And this is where I can stop the wheel for a second and where needle tool comes in handy, because I can stick the needle tail down into the clay and see how much of a bottom thickness I have left. That's quite a bit, but I can always carve it off. I tend to make my bottoms too thin, so making one that's too thick doesn't usually bother me, but I am going to go down just a little bit more. And then this part, some people can pull it apart with their thumbs, some people can't do that. Another way to do it is to take your index finger and pull back through your belly button. I prefer doing it with my thumbs. Just works better for me. So I'm pulling it out to make a sort of donut. And once I get pulled out, two important parts here is I'm going to compress the lip, which means I'm just squeezing the side. And with my index finger, I'm putting a little pressure. And then I'm going to take my thumb down on the bottom, where the bottom is, and I'm just going to rock it back and forth like that. And that's compressing the bottom so that it evens out. And that way we don't have any cracks or anything like that happening. It feels a little uneven, just kind of keep doing that just doing it, slow it down. Keep that pressure kind of even. Think about the idea of that rotate, 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 even down here. And then once I've done that, then I can do my pulls. And pulls come from here with the right hand and to the inside with the left hand. You want to make little indentions at the very bottom of both spots. So the bottom of the clay on the inside and the bottom of here. So what you're doing is you're locking your thumbs and your index fingers are going to work together to pull up walls. Now you need to make sure that they are locked together, because if you do anything like this, or you're doing this or anything like that, that's going to create weakenings in the wall, which will cause it to collapse. And we got to keep steady here, and you want to make sure that you're being consistent, always consistent with these. So here we go. Pull number 1 should be a small pull. My thumbs are locked together. Small pull up. Pulling up and slightly in to create a kind of a cone shape again. Because remember, the clay naturally wants to spin out, so our job is to pull it up and in a little bit. And then you press the lip after each pull. That's very important. Then you do those indentions again, and you keep going. What time is it?
2:14. It should be fine.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to keep doing these pulls. Remember, consistency is key. You don't want to go too fast. You need to pull about the same speed as your wheel. The lines, your finger lines going around the wheel, should be evenly spaced in a way, going like parallel with each other. They shouldn't be going angular at all. On top, kind of compress. When I get to this point, this is a second pull, second, third pull. There's still a lot of clay down at the bottom. I know that just because I know how much clay I have and just being able to tell the thickness. But if you want to see how much clay you really have at the bottom, this is again where you can use a needle tool. Poke it through. Stop when you see it push through on the inside. And see, I have a solid, at least an inch there. Maybe a little over. So I still have a lot of pulling left to do. Because the clay, we don't want it to be that thick. We want it to have even walls going up and down. Keep it from cracking to create a consistency, and because that makes it lighter weight. Again, you could just carve all of that off, but if you want to make a pretty tall piece, then you need that wheel, that clay, so that you can pull up. Now you're working on making a cylinder, because a cylinder is a good even basic shape to learn how to make. You can make pretty much anything from a cylinder, obviously except for like a plate. And even if you start to get, I have a little hump right there, but I can fix that. That's not an issue, it's just where my hands are going in. But if I want to straighten it out, because it is causing a little issue, or making me want to see how it's going to look, this is where I can wet my rib, use it as an angle, and just kind of push up. I'm not doing it heavily, just kind of lightly pushing up. It's moving a little bit of the clay up with it. See, that straightens the edge. And I can press, because again, that was a pull. A small pull, but a pull, nonetheless. And I've seen some students who want to take their hands and pull like this. That's really difficult to do because you're not being able to be consistent with your pulls. It's much better to pull this way. And you will see most people who do throw, they do pull this way. Now when my hands start to get up a little higher, I'm going to try to brace them the best I can. And I might use my fingers, my second and first finger on the inside to pull instead of just the first one. Now when I'm pulling, if I start to feel anything unusual, any wiggle, I'm going to stop and do that thing earlier we talked about where it's just rotate, rotate, rotate through my hand and start again. Remembering that little rotate, rotate, rotate is really beneficial. It asks you to pause and stop for a second and pay attention to what you're doing. This is not something you want to rush into or out of. Patience is a key here. Patience and consistency. Press the lip. And I can check now to see how thick my clay is at the bottom. Down here at the very bottom, let's see how much I have. Still have a good bit down at the bottom. So I'm gonna try to pull. I used a good bit of clay for this, so we're gonna try to pull. Try to do a big pull, let's see. It's already pretty high. I'm gonna create an indentation down here. I'm gonna start from the center, but I'm not really pulling clay from the center. I'm just kind of dragging my finger from the center of it over to the edge. Then when I get to that corner, I'm gonna pull. Now if you're doing something like a bowl, having a thicker bottom, or if you're doing something that's gonna be out more than the lip's gonna be out wider, then having a thicker bottom works well for you because it helps support the weight. But when we're doing a cylinder, it doesn't need that. It should be evenly going up and down. Press. Pretty solid pull. Can do another one though. And see, I'm getting, as it gets higher, it's harder to keep it going in on itself. And if I want to kind of go it in a little bit more on it, I can take my hands at the bottom and just kind of slowly pull up. And this is collaring it back in. Again, I can also use my press after everything you do. I could use my rib again if I needed to there. So, next pull. Feel air bubbles in the clay or any harder spots where other clay is, that's fine. We can deal with those later. Just let them be for the moment. And compress that lip. And my bottom is a lot narrower than the top, which naturally means there's going to be a lot more clay at the bottom. But I'm going to see how much clay I have left down there. I have a little over ½ an inch. That's good for that because I can carve that off, but also because if I want to make a shape, which is what I'm going to do now, I need a little bit more down at the bottom to hold the weight, especially if I'm going to pull out. So it's a good idea. And those holes where you knock the needle in, they'll go away, so that's fine. While you're throwing the wheel. So while I'm pulling this time, I'm going to pull out so that I'm going to push slightly out with my hands so that I'm creating a curve in it. Make sure it's water staying on it. So again, my hands cannot hold on to each other anymore, so I'm just going to have to really focus on keeping my hands steady. And I'm slowly coming up, and I am pushing out with my hand on the inside, and my hand on the right outside is just kind of help guiding that excess clay back up. And it will help when I'm ready to push back in. I take the pressure from the inside off and put pressure from the outside. I don't put too much pressure on the lip anymore because it started getting kind of thin, but I do want to compress it still. So if I want to take an indentation in somewhere, like up here more, I can just use my fingers to kind of colander it in, that whole choke, little collaring like, and that will create an indentation in the clay. I can do that more or less, just kind of depending on what I'm going for, but I don't want that, so I'm going to take that back out. One of my favorite shapes to make is sort of a teardrop bottom shape. I'm going to try to see what I can do there. So you don't have to press it all out to the shape size you want it in one press. Usually better if you do it a couple times. I'm gonna start pushing in about here. Now, the wetter the clay gets, the little bit more difficult it gets to work with. It's very floppy. So you want to keep that in mind while you're working. It starts to get too wet. My bottom still looks a little thick, but that's okay because I can trim that off. And I have some water standing on the inside, so I'm going to get that out with a sponge because that water standing on the inside can make it collapse as well. We don't want that. And it can cause issues during the drying process. I'm going to try to be careful when you're doing it, getting it out. Like maybe just kind of knock the lip a little bit. We also have a sponge on a stick that you can use to do this. Might help a little bit. Alright, so I got my shape at the bottom kind of how I want it, so now I'm going to focus on the top shape. I want it to come in a little bit more. So I'm just going to start right in here and just start pushing in and pulling up a little bit. Kind of creating that inward pull. And then once I get to the top, I've got a compressed lip again. And if your lip gets to where it's a little too inconsistent for you, a little too wiggly at the top, you can use a needle tool to trim that off, but not do it when it's too wet. It makes it more difficult. So you might want to let it dry a little bit before you try that. But if it doesn't bother you, it's fine. It's close. Totally fine. The compressing helps with that. That comes from inconsistent pulls, so I'm having some inconsistency in a couple places. I knew that already, though. My hands are a little shaky today. Again, I'm going to try to get this part. Pull a little bit. Top only. And a little thinner up there. Pinching it a little bit, just kind of pressure. Let me do that rotate, rotate, rotate through my fingers. Alright, so I have the bottom of the shape I want it. Now it's time to make the top of the shape I want it. It's got it kind of thin enough to where I can work on it. So let's see if we can do it. It's working that way. Now to kind of get it more, because I want this to be up and straightened down, I can use a rib again. I can start from lower down, or higher up. I don't have to start from all the way bottom now. And pull up. And that creates the straighter sides. You can see my lip is getting very uneven. Again, that's okay, I can fix that later. You can even use this to kind of curve it and press against it. To help guide it to the shape I want it to be. So that's how I kind of start with working on the wheel.